All right, let's take a quick look at borrowing money by issuing bonds, accruing for interest on those bonds, and eventually redeeming those bonds. Okay, let's pretend that on May 1st, 2017, Egret Corp issued $500,000 of 8% 5-year bonds. We might say they sold the bonds, we might say they issued the bonds, or we might say they borrowed the money by issuing bonds. It means all the same thing, that they're looking to borrow some money for some big project, and instead of going to the local bank, they're going to sell bonds to the general public. Well, what is a bond? A bond is simply a corporate IOU. It'll have a principal amount on there, it'll have an interest rate on there, it'll have a due date, it'll have a CUSIP number. CUSIP stands for the Committee on Uniform Securities Identification Procedures. It was formed in 1962, and so just like your car has a license plate, every stock and every bond has a CUSIP number. All right, let's sell the bonds on May 1st, 2017. What's happening to cash? Cash is going up, and bonds payable is going up. Cash is an asset, assets increase with debits, and bonds payable is a liability account, so it increases with credits. Assuming that 8% is the correct interest rate for this company in this interest rate environment and at this maturity, we'll sell the bonds at face value, or sometimes we say sold at par. So we got $500,000, and we recognize a liability of $500,000. Okay, in the real world, bonds usually pay interest every 6 months, but since we're just beginning to learn about bonds, let's pretend like this bond pays interest just once a year on May 1st. Let's say that we prepare our financial statements only once a year, so we only have to accrue for interest expense. We only have to be concerned about getting interest expense into the correct period as of December 31st. So let's pretend like December 31st has rolled along here, and we have to accrue for interest expense. How many months have transpired since May 1st, 2017 to December 31st, 2017? Hopefully you got that 8 months have transpired. So let's take 8% times $500,000 and discover that annually the interest expense would be $40,000. $40,000 divided by 12 is $3,333.30 a month. Multiply that number times 8 because 8 months have transpired, and our amount of interest expense due at the end of 2017 is $26,667. So we're going to debit interest expense for $26,667 and credit interest payable. Expenses are debits, expenses are debits, expenses are debits, and any account that has the word payable in it is a liability account, and liability accounts increase with credits. So the way the bonds usually work is they pay interest every 6 months, or in this case every year, and then when they come due, the full $500,000 in this case of principal is due on the final maturity. So if we prepared a balance sheet on December 31st, we'd have our assets on the left-hand side, and up here in the current liabilities, because it's due within the next year, would be our interest payable of $26,667. And the principal amount, the $500,000, would be under non-current liabilities, or you might call them long-term liabilities. So that's what the balance sheet would look like. So let's turn on our flux capacitor here and move forward in time to May 1st, 2018. We're going to have to make that first interest payment. We're going to have to pay that interest payable, which represents 8 months of interest expense for last year, and we're going to have to pay 4 months worth of interest expense for 2018. Why don't you pause this video and see if you can create that journal entry. So we're going to debit interest payable. That's the interest we accrued for as of December 31st, and that represents last year's interest expense. And we're also going to have to debit interest expense for $13,333. That's 4 months worth of interest expense during the year 2018. And of course, we cut a check for the $40,000. 8% times $500,000 is $40,000 a year. $26,667 is 8 months of interest expense from last year. $13,333 is 4 months worth of interest expense from this year. Okay, let's skip forward in time again to December 31st, 2018. We have to accrue for 8 months worth of interest expense. It's exactly the same calculation as before. Debit interest expense for $26,667 and credit interest payable for $26,667. Now let's pretend we want to pay these bonds off early. Maybe interest rates have gone down and we want to refinance. Maybe we made some promises when we issued these bonds are kind of inconvenient for us now. Maybe we promised to never pay dividends and we want to start paying dividends to our shareholders. Or maybe we promised not to acquire somebody and it's time for us to acquire somebody. But for whatever reason, we want to pay these bonds off. We go to the bondholders and they say, what's in it for us? And so we have to offer them, say, an extra 2% to convince them to sell. So what we say is that we're calling the bonds at 102, 102%. So we have to pay off that interest payable that we accrued for as of December 31st. We also have to take the principal off our books, the $500,000 principal, and here's that $10,000, that 2% of $500,000 to induce them to allow us to call the bonds. And so we write a check for $536,667. And we make a little note that we're redeeming the bonds at 102. That means 102% of their face value. And that's all there is to issuing bonds, accruing for interest, and redeeming bonds. I hope that helps.